Synopsis of the books of the Bible. Major Prophets. Daniel. By J.N. Darby. Chapter 4. Human Pride and God's Judgment. In Daniel 4 we see the manifestation of human pride. The king glories in the work of his hands, as though he had created his own greatness. This pride brings judgment. Power is reduced to the condition of the beasts that know not God, and are devoid of man's understanding. The only true privilege of man, that which ennobles him, is that he can look up to God and acknowledge him. Without this he looks downward. He cannot suffice to himself. He is degraded. Dependence is his glory, for it sets him before God, gives him to know God, and his mind, associated with God, receives from him its measure and its knowledge. Pride and independence separate man from God. He becomes a beast, devoid of real intelligence. Now, this condition depicts that of the kingdoms of which the prophet speaks, looked at as a whole before God, and represented by the head established by God, Nebuchadnezzar. 7 times, or 7 years, pass over the head of Nebuchadnezzar deprived of his reason. He had exalted himself, he had been humbled. The times of the Gentiles are characterized by the absence of all such understanding as would put governmental power in connection with God. To make idols, to build Babylon, and not to know God. Such was the moral characteristics of a power that God had established in place of his own throne at Jerusalem. Such is the moral capacity of man in possession of that power which has been committed to him. See note. Note. David's throne had been characterized by power in obedience, the king having to write out a copy of the law and observe it. Nebuchadnezzar's throne is one of absolute power, man supreme in the exercise of his own will, the twofold way of testing man in the place of authority. End of note. Nebuchadnezzar's deliverance and testimony to the Most High God. But the scene closes with testimony to the glory of the Most High God, the King of Heaven. Nebuchadnezzar recognizes his majesty and blesses him, now that his judgment is removed. He acknowledges him as him who liveth forever, who abases and exalts whom he will, doing according to his will in heaven and on earth, all men being but vanity before his power and majesty. Here it is not the deliverance of the faithful which produces its effect, but the judgment that fell on the Gentiles themselves, who, after the judgment, are delivered, and understanding given them with respect to Jehovah, and that in connection with the testimony committed to the Jews by the spirit of prophecy which God had bestowed on the remnant. The king lifts up his eyes to heaven, instead of being only a beast that looks down upon the earth. He becomes intelligent and submissive and joyfully blesses the Most High God. The significance of the title Most High. We may remark this title of Most High. It is the name given to Jehovah in the interview between Melchizedek and Abraham, in which is added thereto, possessor of heaven and earth. This is, in fact, the character that God will assume when he shall gather together in one all things in Christ, both which are in heaven and which are on earth, and Christ shall be the true Melchizedek. The Gentiles shall be fully subjected to God. This will be the time of the restitution of all things spoken of by the prophets. The symbol of a great tree. There are yet some detailed observations to be made. It is judgment, followed by deliverance, which produces this result. We may notice the force of this symbol of a great tree. It is a mighty one of the earth, capable of taking others under its protection. In this case, it was one in the highest position possible for man. The fowls of the heaven had their habitation in it, that is to say, that all classes of persons sought shelter and protection in it. We learn also that God takes knowledge of the principles that guide the governments of the earth, considered as the depositories of the power which they hold from God. Although it is not, as in Israel, his throne on the earth, God watches over all, and judges that to which he has committed authority. He does not rule immediately, but he holds responsible him to whom he has entrusted the rule, in order that he might own the authority of God as supreme in this world. The application of the term watcher. With respect to the term watcher, I do not think that intelligence as to who it was that brought the decree of judgment goes beyond Nebuchadnezzar's religious condition. Daniel ascribes it immediately to the Most High. Those angels may be its intelligent instruments, and that its administration may be in some sort committed to them, presents no difficulty, and the Epistle to the Hebrews, as well as other scriptures, teaches us that angels are thus employed. The world to come will not be thus subjected to them. We see, in verse 27, that Daniel sets his responsibility before Nebuchadnezzar, exhorting him to alter his conduct. Nebuchadnezzar's acknowledgement of God as King of Heaven. We may also remark here, that it is the King of Heaven whom Nebuchadnezzar acknowledges. This was necessarily his place. The God of the earth at his throne at Jerusalem. But then Nebuchadnezzar would have had no place there. We never find the throne at Jerusalem in Daniel, either morally or prophetically. His prophecies always stop short of that. He is a captive among the Gentiles, faithful to God there, and taught of him. But God cannot be to him the God of the earth. See note. It is the God of heaven, ruling everywhere and over all things, doing according to his will in heaven and on earth, but not yet reigning over the earth as the king of the earth. On the contrary, he had just renounced this, and had committed the power to Nebuchadnezzar, while he withdrew from the presence of his earthly people's iniquity to shut himself up in his supreme and immutable power, the results of which would not be shown till afterwards, but according to which he even then governed, although hidden from the eyes of men. Note. The seed of David will not be in captivity at Babylon when God takes his place as the God of the earth. End of note. The reader may perhaps expect more detail. It will be found in the communications made immediately to Daniel. But those who have laid hold of the principles we have been establishing, and the great object of these chapters is to present them, will possess elements of the greatest importance for understanding all the prophecies of this book, and without these principles, the meaning of its revelations will never be clearly apprehended. It must be remembered that we are on the ground here of the Jews in captivity among the Gentiles, understanding God's dealings with them, and his judgment of their condition while the power had been left in their hands.